Hello, hello. How you doing today? I'm your host Grim, or you can call me Jay. And today, or tonight really, we're going to invest ourselves in some horror. Something that can actually scare us. But before we do, well, go get comfortable. Please get something to eat. Because within 5 seconds, here we go. Our first story is three scratches means you're dead. The first one just appeared on my door. I live in a small town in Vermont. I won't tell you its name, mostly because I don't want to draw any attention to myself. I moved here 6 months ago to take over this record store that's been a town fixture for yonks, the previous owner, Martin. He was desperate to leave, practically gave the place away. His hands shook so bad he could barely sign the papers. But he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone or something to be standing there. That should have been my first clue. But when you've been living out of your car, scraping by on part-time work at gas stations and dollar stores, landing a deal like this feels like the lottery. The store barely breaks even, but it came with a small apartment above the store. A kind of attic flat with a little kitchenette and a serviceable bathroom. This really felt like heaven for me. But at night, the pipes groan and the floorboards bitch every time you take a step. But it's warm, safe, and has a very, very epic view over the rooftops. At first, I felt like I'd stumble upon a perfect slice of small town Americana. The kind they put in poster cards or in those Hallmark movies my mom used to watch, you know? But Victorian homes built from locally quarried stone line, the winding cobblestone streets. Neighbors wave, but they don't pry. Weekly farmer markets in the town square where old ladies sell their jam in mason jars with handwritten labels. This is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, especially their business, but they pretend that they don't. My first morning here, I was in a shop rearranging the store's inventory when Sheriff Tapper poked his head in. He's a very older man with cheeks that never quite recovered from acne in his youth, a slight paunch, and a very, very too calm voice that always leaves you wondering if he's hiding something. He offered to show me around the record store, basically just pointing out the dusty corners. And weirdly, an old fuse box. But he said something that made me gulp and swallow a good bit, because he said this with a very serious look. Listen, he said, tapping a very, very stern finger on the old wooden top, the countertop to be specific. Since you're new here, there might come a time you might notice some weird shit scratched onto your door. If you see anything like that, you come to me right away. Day of. No excuses. He tried to keep it casual, but his eyes gave it away. Probably won't happen to you, he added. Very quickly, he said, but if it does, handling it fast is something we need to do. And you absolutely have to tell us right away. I cannot emphasize how fast you need to do this. Got it? I remember staring at him and a half smile pugged from the corners of my mouth. Sure, it was some kind of joke. Sure, but why? Who's doing it? He just waved a meaty hand, some guy named Tapper. And well, he dismissed the question like smoke. Wouldn't want to scare you off on your first day, he said. And he walked out, letting the brass bell from the shop announce his exit. I chalked it up to some small town intricacies, or some eccentrics. Maybe some local pranksters who like to scratch up the doors. But early morning, I noticed the sheriff walking the length of Main Street, shining his flashlight on every door, examining one by one. He did it methodically, like a doctor checking stitches, looking for something very specific. When he caught me watching from my second floor window, he gave me a curt nod and moved on. He does this every morning, every single one, without fail, rain, shine, or New England blizzard. A couple of months later, I was up before dawn, flipping through dusty vinyls when I heard a low, rhythmic stomping. Peering through the concert posters plastered on the shop's front windows, Kurt Cobain's dead eyes stared back at me. I saw them marching by. Mothers in thick wool coats, faces set like stone. Men clutching garden tools and kitchen knives that gleamed dully in the pre-dawn light. Old Mr. Harrison from the hardware store had his Winchester cradled in his arms, like a sleeping child. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe the same morbid curiosity that makes you slow down past a car wreck. They converged on a small blue house near the town square, the kind with gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch. The woman they dragged out was still in her nightgown, her feet bare against the cold cobblestones. She never fought back. She didn't fight back. She kept shaking her head, tears cutting clean tracks down her dirty, smudged cheeks, begging them to give her more time. And don't you see this is all bullshit? Eventually her words dissolved into raw screams about how they were all crazy, her fists beating away at anyone who tried to approach. The crowd's response was a wall of sound accusations about overstaying, warnings about putting us all at risk, demanding that she honor the arrangement. I thought about calling the cops, but if you think about it, they were in the crowd as well. Local badges shining in golden dawn, uniforms crinkled and unironed like they hurried to put them on. 20 minutes later, someone pulled up in a pickup truck already loaded with boxes and suitcases, like they packed her belongings before even getting her out of bed. They pretty much dragged her kicking and screaming into the passenger seat, and the truck disappeared down the mountain road that leads out of town. After that, the mob dissolved, and that whole day, I didn't hear a single word about it. I never got to sleep that night. I sat in my apartment above, listening to the wind whistle through the gapes in my old windows, and I tried to convince myself, that there was a reasonable explanation. Small towns can be so insular. I gulped. I told myself, she must have done something to deserve it. The next morning I took a walk. I took a long walk past the blue house. Front door still wide open. Yesterday's newspaper sitting untouched on the front lawn. That was when I noticed marks on her door. 2 of them, shaped like crooked eyes, scratched deep into the wood. They looked kind of fresh, but the wood around it was still pale, raw, like an exposed bone. I took a picture and reverse searched the image, but came up empty. Just page after page of actual eyes staring back at me until all I could do was just close the browser. Figured maybe it was unrelated. Told myself this happens all the time, Coincidence. Life settled in after that first morning. I threw myself into the store, learning the regulars' taste, ordering rare pressings that they would mention offhandedly, One customer in particular, Cal, would spend hours browsing the jazz selection, talking about Miles Davis and John Coltrane like they were old friends. You got good instincts, he told me one afternoon, carefully sliding a Thelonious Monk album back into his sleeves. Most newcomers, they don't. He trailed off, and his weathered face clouding over. They don't last long enough to learn the ropes. I couldn't help myself, and I asked, like that woman, the one they drove out my first week here? The vinyl sleeve crinkled in a suddenly tight grip. Don't go thinking we're a bunch of bullies. That was a kindness, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. If she stayed, she'd still be gone, just in a different kind of way. He set the record down with trembling hands and left without another word. 2 months passed. I was getting comfortable and starting to feel like I belonged. For the first time in many years, I was earning a weekly wage. Went to bed full every night. And then to top all of that off, I had some money left over to furnish my loft just how I liked it. It was odd, almost novel, having a place I could call home. Except for that one morning with the woman in that blue house. I always kept remembering it. Because Sheriff Tapper walked each morning, every single morning, to inspect the doorways. This place was nothing of short of heaven to me. Then one morning, the parade of footsteps returned. This time, they came for old Abel. He ran the bakery for 40 years. Everyone knew Abel. He donated day-old bread to the food bank and remembered every kid's birthday with a free muffin. The scene was different. Abel hugged each person in the crowd, tears in his eyes but a gentle smile on his face. It's time, he kept saying. I'm just surprised it took him this long. The mob was somber, some people openly weeping as they helped him pack his truck. I checked his door the next day. And just like the blue house, there was a symbol etched into the wooden eye. Just one this time, staring out like a cyclopean eye. I asked around about these symbols, and some folks brushed me off. Others gave evasive answers, but one thing was consistent. If your door got marked, you had to leave town immediately. It was said to keep everyone safe. There was talk of consequences of some looming danger no one wanted to describe, like a shadow you catch in your peripheral vision but disappears when you turn to look at it. It became clear that the sheriff's morning inspections was his way of catching these scratchings early. He would warn the inhabitants to leave. Sometimes they went peaceful, like old Abel. Sometimes when it was a new person that was marked in town, sure, they would put up a fight, but no one ever explained who or what made these marks. The best I could piece together was after 3 markings, something horrible would happen. Last night, I was doing the final count of the register when rapid footsteps approached the shop. I glanced up, ready to wave away another late customer, when someone started pounding on the door with such urgency that the bell above it jangled. Through the concert posters, I could see Cal's familiar silhouette, but something was wrong. His normal, relaxed posture was rigid, and he kept shifting from foot to foot like he was standing on burning coals. I opened the door. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the autumn chill. Listen carefully, he said, the words tumbling out so fast that they blurred together like cars in a highway pileup. One hand gripped my shoulder with crushing force. No matter what happens tonight, stay inside. Keep the lights off, TV off, absolute silence. Lock everything. His eyes darted to the lengthening shadows that crept across the cobblestones. If someone knocks, if they ask to be let in, don't move, don't make eye contact through the windows, he said shakily. And whatever you do, do not respond. Cal, what the fuck is going on? The Peterson family, he explained hurriedly, his breath coming in short gasps like he'd been running. 3 markings. They covered it up with paint. Didn't want to leave. Left us wide open. His grip tightened painfully, then released. I can't say no more. Rules. I need to get home before dark. He checked his watch in his face, and possibly he went even paler, like all the blood had drained out. He said wearily, that made even my blood chill. Oh God. Oh God, he looked up at me. Right before he sprinted off and said, I might be already too late. He sprinted away before I could stop him, his footsteps echoing off the old buildings. I stood there with the key half turned in the lock, watching him disappear around the corner. I followed his instructions, though I felt ridiculous doing it, like a kid hiding underneath the covers from the boogeyman. But something in his voice, a raw, primal, animal fear that sent ice water through my veins. Throughout my entire life, I've never seen anyone so genuinely terrified, not even the first time that they drove that woman out of town. But now, buckle up, y'all. This is when things get extremely serious. The evening crept by in suffocating silence. I sat in my darkened apartment, watching the streetlights flicker to life outside. Every creak of the old building settling made my heart skip. I kept checking my phone, considered calling Cal, but his warning about absolute silence held me back. The first knock came at 12:07. I only know that because I obsessively kept checking the time. It was soft, tentative, like someone testing if the sound would carry. 3 gentle taps, evenly spaced, coming from the shop's front door downstairs. I held my breath, Cal's warning about echoing in my mind. For a long moment, nothing. Then it came again. Harder. This time. So much harder. It was a rhythm of desperate needs, and then... Hello? The voice sliced through the darkness, and my blood ran cold. It was Cal's voice, edged with the same fear, but quiet, like he was trying not to get caught. Please, I didn't make it home in time. I've been stuck out here in the dark for hours. I laid there, heart beating in my chest. Then I told myself I was being stupid, that this town was weird and superstitious. What if Cal was actually in trouble? I couldn't leave him out there, you know? What kind of person would that make me? Still, I walked so quietly, I'd even dare to mess up. Each step careful and measured, like I was crossing a frozen lake. I crept to the stairwell, tiptoed through the shadowy vinyl store where album covers seemed to follow my movement. Through the door's frosted glass, I could make out a shadow. It was roughly Cal's height and build. Please, the voice cracked, hitching on a sob that sounded like it was being torn from deep inside. The smart thing would have been to been silent, but I had to know. If it is really you. If it is really you, I said barely with a whisper. Tell me your favorite record in the store. The silence that followed dragged on and on. Then came a response that indicated I was beyond in grave danger, and I was a super dumbass. Because in a voice that was both Cal's and not Cal's, it said, I don't know. Ice crawled up my spine like 1,000 tiny spiders. Leaf, I managed to choke out. Now. A pause. Then something outside laughed. Didn't he tell you? And I saw a rather long fingernail trace its way down my door frame. Not to respond to anyone who came knocking. I stumbled backward, my foot catching onto the first stair. The shadow behind the glass seemed to grow, spreading like a stain, darker than the darkness around it. I took the stairs 2 at a time, slamming and locking my apartment door behind me. I dragged my heavy oak dresser in front of it, then huddled in the corner of my bedroom as far from any of the windows as I could get. The knocking continued sporadically throughout the night, moving from window to window, accompanied by Cal's voice trying different tactics, pleading, demanding, bargaining. Around 3 a.m. it cycled through other voices I knew. Abel, the first woman I knew on my the woman I knew on my first week. Then a voice that sounded oddly like my own. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices seemed to seep through my fingers, straight into my brain. Sleep was beyond impossible. I watched the time tick and talk throughout the endless hours. Finally, dawn broke to the sound of screaming. This time, the mob moved with purpose, but their usual grim determination had been replaced by fear. Sheriff Mills was already at the scene, his face the color of chalk as he waved people back. The mob had led to a house 2 blocks away from my own, the Petersons' house. I recognized it because they painted the door recently, a cheery yellow that had seemed out of place in our somber little town. The door was hanging off its hinges now. Splinters of wood scattered across the welcome mat like broken teeth. Blood spilled everywhere, pulling on the welcome mat where it said home, sweet home. Now, saying home, swim me, trailing into the darkness beyond the broken door like breadcrumbs leading into a witch's forest. A police constable was scrapping at something on the door. Fresh paint, still wet, hastily applied over familiar eye-shaped symbols. There were 3 of them. Must have been covering them up each morning. Tappers whispered gravely. They didn't have the best life, reckon they had nowhere to go. The whole family. Someone else whispered, drowning out his words. Tried to cover up the scratchings. You can't hide from them. They always know. I found Cal in the crowd. his face gray, pale, looking like week old snow. He said to he said to me, this wouldn't have happened if they just told the truth, you know? Just shaking his head over and over. If they just followed the rules, you know? Why? I asked, desperate. What is this? I said. I can't say. He attempted a reassuring smile that looked more like a grimace. But you should be safe. So long as you follow the rules. His demeanor, everything about him shifted. It became sharper, more focused. You didn't hear anything last night, did you? Open the door? Talk to anyone? I hesitated and shook my head. No. Nothing. That lie that I told tasted like copper on my tongue. The bodies of that family were wheeled out in black bags as the sun climbed higher. Back home, I checked the front door to the vinyl shop compulsively. No markings, and I exhaled slowly, with relief flooding all over me. Maybe I can make this work. Sure, the town had its dark secrets, didn't they all? Corrupt mayors, toxic waste systems, but ours had just this. And hadn't they taken me in when I had nothing? Given me a home, a purpose, a place to belong? As long as you followed the rules, you could survive. People here did it every day. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, rehearsing every single reason to stay. Justifications for looking the other way. Even mental gymnastics to convince ourselves that the monster was just a shadow. Something from underneath our bed, you know? Like a boogeyman. That the scratching at our window was just a tree branch. Then I saw it. Oh, I saw it. There, carved into my attic door. A single eye-shaped symbol. The wood around it still fresh and pale. This isn't a door that Sheriff Tapper can check. This is a door nobody should have access to. So now I'm writing this, sitting cross-legged in my bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. Well. I don't have any family left to miss me, and all my friends that I've made are from here. They'd be more likely to show up with pitchforks than helping hands if they knew. I don't know what to believe anymore. Part of me thinks it's just the town theater, or some madman with a twisted sense of humor. Part of me wonders if this is a superstition turned hysteria. People fulfilling their own dark projects, prophecies, or whatever it might be. But I just got back from the hardware store with a can of paint. And I'm sitting in front of this door. And I'm thinking I'm going to tempt fate, you know. I might try to cover up the mark and see what happens. Because that's the thing about living in your car. It teaches you sometimes. Having nothing left to lose is its own kind of freedom. What do you think? Should I cover it up? Well, if you ask me what do I think you're an asshole. But at the same time, it's extremely understandable and even justified. Now, you can chalk it up to be some superstition, some crazy stuff that not even you can understand, that nobody can understand. But after you just saw a family get torn apart, and then the entirety of you fighting for your life, surviving that dreaded night to where you couldn't even get that sleep, where something was aching, driven to get to you by any means necessary, and you still deny it. And then you don't tell anyone about what happened. You disobeyed the rules. You were too naive. You were too this, that, and the third. But I understand. I really do. I hope you know now, whatever happens is totally on you, and that you deserve it. Just make sure that you, as the viewer, you may want to check all over your house for the markings. If it's one, I advise you to move. But if you feel bold enough like this dumbass, sure, you can paint over it. Sure, you can do whatever you want to do, not tell anyone. But just remember, 3 markings. And well, you better hope it's quick.